A poker game that reunited a father and son in death, two of the most important figures in American history whose lives and deaths were eerily intertwined, and two men whose deaths oddly bookended the First World War. These are terrifying coincidences in history that could be glitches in reality. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were two of the most important figures in American history. Despite their political differences, they grew closer later in life and actually became pretty good friends. What's really bizarre though is how both of them passed away on the same day. Now that's already quite a coincidence, but the day they passed away, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the very document they both helped draft. Adams at the age of 90 had been in relatively good health, but collapsed in his reading chair that afternoon. His last words reportedly were, "Jefferson still lives." But no, Jefferson had actually died earlier that day around noon, after battling illness for some time. News of their deaths circulated quickly, and across the nation commemorations were held to honor them. The circumstances surrounding their deaths are eerie for sure, but there's some beauty to this story as well. The pair had been political adversaries in the past, but toward the end of their lives they became friends, and in the end they were tied together in a way no one could have ever predicted. Their deaths on the same day have come to kind of symbolize the shared ideals and values that defined the founding of the United States. In 1858, a bizarre coincidence occurred in San Francisco that involved a poker game, a man's death, and an unlikely twist of fate. Robert Fallon, a British man, was killed for cheating at a poker game at the Bella Union Saloon. Fallon's $600 winnings were left behind. See, the superstition at the time was that money won through cheating was unlucky. So the players decided to give the $600 pot to the first stranger who walked by, hoping he'd take Fallon's place at the table and they'd eventually win all the money back. They called a young man over who sat down and incredibly turned that $600 into $2,200. Police soon arrived to investigate the guy who'd just been killed and asked for that $600 back so they could pass it on to Fallon's next of kin. Well, it turned out that Fallon's next of kin was right there at the table already. He was the stranger that had been walking by the saloon and took his father's place, only he didn't know it. He hadn't seen his father in 7 years. It's hard to say whether this next woman had terrible luck or incredible luck. It's a kind of a perfect blend of both, really. Violet Jessup's life sounds like something out of a movie, but it's all true. This Irish-Argentine woman survived the sinking of both the Titanic and its sister ship, the Britannic. On April 14, 1912, Jessup was working as a stewardess on the Titanic when it struck an iceberg and began to sink. In the chaos, she was told to serve as an example to non-English speaking passengers, showing them how to board their lifeboats. She eventually made it off the ship, escaping in lifeboat 16. Speaking of the number 16, on November 21st, 1916, Jessup was serving as a nurse on the Britannic when it hit a mine and began sinking in the Angean River. She grabbed a lifeboat and held on, eventually being rescued. Remarkably, she'd also suffered an injury to her head during the incident. Now, the fact that she'd survived both of these incidents is amazing, but what makes it all even stranger is that before all of this, she'd also sailed on the RMS Olympic, which collided with a British warship in 1911. So she survived all three of these accidents. It just seems like the universe did not want this woman sailing on boats. The first and the last deaths of World War I are a chilling coincidence. John Parr and George Ellison were the first and last British soldiers killed during the war. Parr was killed on August 21st, 1914, only 17 days after Britain declared war. Then on November 11th, 1918, just 90 minutes before the war ended, George Ellison, age 40, was killed. What's strange is that the two soldiers are buried right across from each other in St. Symphorian Military Cemetery, Belgium, separated by only 15 feet of grass. And no, this was not done on purpose. Their graves were placed there without any knowledge of their first and last statuses at the time. Out of every British soldier who died in the First World War, the first and last to die lay right across from each other. It's as if history itself placed them together, almost bookending the war. In the 1920s, American novelist Anne Parrish had an eerie experience while in Paris, also kind of sweet though. While browsing a bookstore, she came across an old book that she remembered fondly from her childhood, Jack Frost and Other Stories. She picked it up, showing it to her husband, telling him about how much she loved the book when she was young. Her husband went to open it, and he noticed there was an inscription on the inside. Ann Parrish, 209 North Weber Street, Colorado Springs. Turned out this was Anne's very same childhood copy of the book. I don't know what got this guy pissed off, but his life story sounds pretty biblical, in a wrathful punishment sort of way. This poor sap named Walter Summerford was struck by lightning 4 times, 3 times while he was alive and once after his death, just as a final middle finger from above. It all started in 1918 when Summerford, then a major in the British Army during World War I, was struck by lightning on a battlefield in Belgium. Already wild being struck by lightning as is, especially while in battle though, as if life wasn't already hard enough for him. Anyway, that was just strike 1, and it left him paralyzed from the waist down. He persevered though, and after finally recovering and retiring to Vancouver, where he had a solid 6 years lightning free, he was struck a second time while fishing, leaving him paralyzed on the right side. Somehow he survived again though. Then in 1930, while taking a walk in the park, one of the most innocent, inoffensive things a person can do, he was struck by lightning a 3rd time, this time leaving him bedridden until his death 2 years later. But as I said, he wasn't even off the hook yet, as his gravestone was then struck by lightning, making it the 4th strike in his life, or afterlife. In Monza, Italy, King Umberto I and a local restaurant owner had a very strange encounter. The 2 men were nearly identical in appearance, first off, down to their face and build, and after discussing their striking resemblance, they discovered even more eerie similarities. Both were born on March 14th of 1844 in the same town. Both men had married women named Margherita. The restaurant owner even opened his restaurant on the same day that King Umberto was crowned King of Italy. Then on July 29th, 1900, King Umberto was informed that the restaurant owner had been killed that day in a mysterious accident. Well, just after the king received the news, an anarchist named Gaetano Bresci fired at the king 4 times, killing him instantly. The man had been seeking to avenge the people killed in Milan during the suppression of the riots in May of 1898. This next story is unbelievable and incredibly beautiful in a way. So in 1914, a German mother had her infant son's photo taken and left the film to be developed at a store in Strasbourg. When World War I broke out though, she couldn't go back for it of course, so she just assumed that she'd never get to see the photo. Well, fast forward 2 years and she bought a new film plate in Frankfurt to take a picture of her newborn daughter. She developed the photo and was upset at first. There was something wrong with the picture, but when she looked more closely, she noticed the photo was a double exposure. Her daughter's picture was overlaid with her son from 2 years before. Somehow her original undeveloped film had been mislabeled as unused and was sold back to her. So she finally got to develop her son's photo, just not in the way she'd been expecting. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe wrote the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, where the crew of a stranded ship draws straws to decide who will be sacrificed for food. The unlucky soul is a cabin boy named Richard Parker, who ends up being killed and eaten by the others. In true Poe fashion, it's a grim tale, but unlike his more fantastical work, this one would actually play out in real life. In 1884, a ship sank, and the survivors were stranded at sea, starving. They drew straws to determine who would be sacrificed, and the person picked was the cabin boy, whose name was Richard Parker. Fictional account from nearly half a century earlier seemed to mirror a real-life event, almost like the story had somehow been predicting the future. Henry Ziegland was born in 1861 in Honeygrove, Texas. He was a farmer who got involved with a woman named Charla Karras, but in 1883 he ended the relationship. Charla was devastated. So devastated that she ended up taking her own life. Her brother was completely distraught. He blamed Henry for his sister's death and decided that he wanted some revenge. Well, one day he snuck into Henry's barn with a firearm and fired at him. The bullet only grazed Henry, but he smartly played dead. What Henry didn't know though was that the bullet had lodged itself into a tree by the barn. Well, 20 years later, Henry decided he was going to chop down that very tree. It was too thick for an axe, so he decided he'd need to blow it up. When the explosion went off, Henry died instantly. It wasn't from the blast. The bullet that had been lodged in the tree 2 decades earlier flew out at him. Absolutely nuts. The last few decades, thousands of people have vanished in national parks and forests across North America. Some of these cases are a lot stranger than others and share some eerie patterns. The person disappears suddenly, often in the middle of a group, only to be found, if they're found at all, in places that had already been searched, sometimes miles away, sometimes in impossible locations like high cliffs or extra dense parts of the woods that would be super hard to reach even with gear. And in some of these cases, the missing person reappears with zero memory of where they've been or how long they were gone. Former police officer David Paulides has been collecting these cases under what he calls Missing 411. He specifically filters out incidents with logical explanations, so that what's left are stories that truly don't make sense. In some reports, tracking dogs have refused to follow the scent or get visibly spooked. Clocks act strangely, storms roll in out of nowhere, and in a few extreme examples, the person claims they were watched or lured by something they couldn't quite explain. One theory is that these people aren't just getting lost, they're slipping through cracks in reality. In the early 80s, rumors started circulating about strange military experiments happening at Camp Hero, an old Air Force station in Montauk, New York. The story went that there was psychic testing going on, time travel, and the opening of gateways to other dimensions. A few people had come forward saying they'd been a part of it, either willingly or as kids who were abducted into the program. According to these accounts, the government was trying to weaponize the human mind. They supposedly succeeded in creating psychic soldiers who could manipulate objects, see and hear things that were going on from very distant locations, or even open dimensional rifts. There's one story where they allegedly opened a portal too wide and something came through, something not human. Supposedly, they shut the project down after that. Another account describes a time chair, which let people travel into the past or future, but often came with disorienting side effects. Of course, there have never been any official documents that have confirmed any of this. It's easy to pass this off as an urban legend, but the thing is, some of the same people involved in these stories also had ties to MKUltra, which was very real and proven. So that's kind of given the Montauk project a little more validity to some. As always though, what do you think? This next one goes back to 1943, in the middle of World War II. The story is that US Navy tried to make a ship invisible to radar at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The ship was the USS Eldridge, but according to people who claim to have witnessed it, something much stranger happened. That's putting it lightly. Something cosmically horrific happened. They say the ship vanished completely and then reappeared hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, and when it came back, the crew was not well. First off, there were a ton of them missing, and many who had shown back up with the ship were quite literally with the ship. They'd fused into the metal. The lucky ones just went insane, claiming to have seen something on the other side. The Navy has always denied that anything like this happened, but the story came to light through a man named Carl Allen, who sent letters detailing the events later. Of course, he was written off for being unstable, but the story took off anyway. There's even an X-Files episode about this one. To be fair, X-Files goes in some incredibly weird directions, so this is in no way adding validity to the story, but it does go to show just how much the Philadelphia experiment, as it came to be called, was talked about. What's interesting about this story is how specific it is, too. It doesn't really feel like your typical urban legend. It sounds more like someone trying to explain something that they don't fully understand. Who knows, maybe something strange really did happen that day. Maybe there really was an experiment that caused a breach in the fabric of reality. In the small town of Taos, New Mexico, people have been hearing a strange sound since the early 90s, a low-frequency hum, like a distant engine running, a hum that never seems to go away. Not everyone hears it, but for those who do, it's constant. Where does it come from? Well, that's the mystery. But the people who hear it report headaches, insomnia, and just overall dread, like something's just off. The government has sent scientists to investigate. They've recorded the environment, tested the soil, the air, everything, but they couldn't find what was actually causing it. The hum isn't picked up by microphones or equipment, so it's basically impossible to study. It's almost like it's happening inside the victims' bodies, which is about as terrifying as it sounds, no pun intended. Now, there are theories as to what this could be. Electromagnetic interference, underground drilling, some sort of secret military technology, but is it possible people are hearing something even stranger than that? Like An echo from another dimension? Maybe the hum isn't a sound at all, but more of a frequency from another place. Something leaking in. Just a thought. This story popped up on Reddit a couple years back from a user who deleted their account shortly after posting. Here's what they wrote. I've lived in the same apartment for about 4 years. It's nothing fancy, 1 bedroom, open kitchen, small balcony, but about 2 weeks ago I came home from work and noticed something weird. The door handle felt different, like it was just slightly lower than I remembered. Same style, same lock, just off. When I walked in, everything looked normal at first, but my keys were in a different bowl than I usually leave them. I thought maybe I was just tired, but then I noticed my bookshelf. There were 2 books on it that I don't own. One of them was a collection of short stories by Ray Bradbury that I'd been meaning to buy but hadn't yet. The other was a guidebook for a city I've never been to. I asked my girlfriend if she bought them over. She said no. I called my landlord just to be sure no one had entered while I was at work. He checked. Nothing. Since then, a few other tiny things have changed. A painting in the hallway is an inch higher. My phone background changed to a photo I don't remember taking. I know how this sounds, but it feels like I came back to a version of my life that's almost the same, just not quite. Guys, I can't speak to the validity of stories like this on Reddit. If you are experiencing things like this, go to a doctor. Just, some advice. In December of 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers stationed on the remote Flannan Isles off the coast of Scotland vanished without a trace. When a relief crew arrived after a storm had delayed them, they found the lighthouse empty. Everything inside was undisturbed. Clocks had stopped, meals were left on the table, and one of the men's coats was still hanging on a hook. The only clue was a logbook entry mentioning a violent storm, but the weather had actually been pretty calm the day they supposedly wrote it. No bodies were ever found. The official explanation is that a massive wave may have swept them out to sea, but that doesn't add up. Why were there no signs of struggle? No debris, nothing washed up. It was like they just stepped off the island and vanished. For decades, amateur astronomers and conspiracy theorists have pointed to something strange orbiting Earth, an unidentified object known as the Black Knight satellite. The story really kicked off in the 50s when both the US and Soviet Union detected something unusual in orbit. It wasn't one of theirs. It didn't match the movement of any known satellites at the time. And then there's the really weird part. In the 70s, images taken during a NASA mission seemed to show this strange, jagged object in orbit, and it didn't look like space junk or any known satellite. Some believe it's been up there for 13,000 years, sent by an ancient civilization or aliens as a monitoring device. Nikola Tesla himself claimed to have received a repeating signal from space in the 1890s, and some now connect that to this. No one knows exactly what it is. NASA says the object in the photos is just a thermal blanket that came loose during a mission, but that explanation doesn't sit well with people who've followed the story for decades. If it really is something watching us from above, then who or what put it there, and how long have they been watching?
Alright, this one's a bit of a strange rabbit hole. It revolves around a movie that doesn't actually exist, but has a bizarre legend attached to it. So there's this film that supposedly starred the actor Sinbad. If you're like me, you know him from the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Jingle All the Way. But some also remember Sinbad having been in this movie called Shazam in the 90s, where he played a genie. The premise is that he granted wishes and caused chaos in typical 90s kids movie fashion. A lot of people swear they saw this movie, renting it or watching reruns of it on TV. The only problem is no one can find it now. For years, people have tried to track down any trace of this Shazam movie, but it doesn't seem to exist anywhere in any record. Sinbad himself has even come out and said, yeah, I've never made that movie. And yet, a surprising number of people are adamant that they remember it. It's become one of the more popular Mandela effects, where a large number of people remember something one way, which turns out to be different, or in this case, not even existing at all. So, what's going on here? Well, one theory is that people are confusing it with another movie called Shazam, starring Shaquille O'Neal as the genie, which was released in 1996. And yeah, I can see people getting confused about the name, but I mean, are all of these people really confusing Sinbad with Shaq? That doesn't really add up. I mean, it's possible, but what if there's a parallel universe where things are just slightly different, and in that universe, there really is a movie called Shazam starring Sinbad, and this very second, there's another version of me filming a video being like, damn, I could have sworn there was a movie called Kazam back in the 90s starring Shaq, but nobody can find it. Next up is Bermeja, a whole island that completely vanished. This one's wild because it really was a real place, a tiny island in the Gulf of Mexico near the Yucatan Peninsula. You could find it on old maps, and even the Mexican government used to claim that it existed. In fact, it was officially documented as part of Mexico's territory, right in the area where they had a territorial dispute with the US over oil rights. Well, in 1997, a Mexican Navy survey came out saying the island was no longer there. They couldn't find it with any of their modern equipment, even though it was supposed to be there, of course. Having been marked on maps for hundreds of years, the island seemed to have just disappeared though. Well, your first thought is that it probably just sank into the ocean, but that's highly unlikely because the area was relatively shallow and there's actually no sign of the island ever having existed in the first place. So what are some other possibilities? Well, some people think it was deliberately erased from maps as part of some secret government deal. Others say cartographers had been wrong the entire time, and that the island was either never there or is a misidentified rock or sandbar that got labeled as an island. But there's a more fringe idea too, one that ties into the title of this video, of course. The idea that Bermeja never existed in the first place, and what we're actually dealing with is a glitch or shift between parallel universes. Some say it's like the island slipped through the cracks of time and was never meant to be in our reality at all. Now let's talk about Flight 19, one of the most famous disappearances in aviation history, and of course, it's tied to the Bermuda Triangle. This incident goes back to December 5th of 1945. Flight 19 was a training mission for 5 US Navy bombers flying out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Everything was going well until something went horribly wrong. The pilots lost their bearings and they got disoriented. According to reports, they were never able to get a proper fix on their location, and things quickly went from bad to worse. One of the pilots even reported that the compass wasn't working right, but the entire squadron of 5 planes just vanished, like they were swallowed up by the ocean. No wreckage was ever found, and the Navy couldn't figure out exactly what happened. And on top of that, a rescue plane was sent out to search for them, and that plane also went missing. No trace of it was ever found either. The story just adds more mystery when consider how much equipment was searching and still nothing showed up. People started speculating, of course. Some think it was probably a simple navigation error or mechanical failure, nothing too crazy, but others believe that the Bermuda Triangle was involved, that maybe this mysterious region of the ocean is some sort of portal or electromagnetic anomaly that messes with navigation systems, sucking planes and ships into some other dimension or an alternate reality. Others go even further, saying that UFOs or time warps are to blame, but at the end of the day, no one knows what really happened to Flight 19, which is exactly why it's still talked about to this day. The USS Cyclops was this massive American naval vessel that disappeared without a trace in 1918. It was carrying over 300 crew members and a hefty load of manganese ore from the Caribbean to Baltimore, and it vanished somewhere again in the Bermuda Triangle. It's one of the most baffling disappearances in naval history, and what makes it so mysterious is that this wasn't just a random ship lost at sea. It was a huge ship with a solid reputation. It was part of the US Navy during World War II. The Cyclops had been a workhorse for the Navy for years, but when it set out from Barbados in March of 1918, something obviously went wrong. It didn't check in when it was supposed to, and no one heard from it again. The ship was huge, 541 feet long, and it was designed to withstand the rough seas, so it's hard to believe it could just sink without a trace. No wreckage was ever found. Some think a freak storm or a mechanical failure could have caused it to sink. Others believe the ship was sabotaged, maybe by enemies during the war, but because the thing disappeared somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle, some people of course think something stranger may have happened. In 1587, a group of English settlers landed on Roanoke Island, which is off the coast of modern-day North Carolina. They were sent to establish a permanent colony, but when a supply ship returned in 1590, they were gone, completely vanished. The settlement was empty, not a single person was left behind. There wasn't even any sign of a struggle. It was as if the whole colony had never even been there in the first place. But they had been. There was a clue that remained. The only sign of them was Croatoan carved into a tree, the word. Now, the thing is, Croatoan was the name of a nearby island and also the name of a Native American tribe in the area. So, some believe the settlers may have tried to integrate with the tribe, but why would they leave behind such a cryptic message? Could they have been forced to leave by some hostile force, or did they just abandon the colony altogether? Maybe they just moved further inland, but then why did they leave no trace of where they went? Of course, there's also the theory that something much stranger happened. Some people wonder the settlers didn't vanish into the woods or the sea at all, but rather slipped into some other dimension, like a glitch in the fabric of time or space. Could Roanoke have been one of those spots in history where a tear in reality caused an entire settlement to disappear? Now, I will admit that this one may be a bit of a stretch, but I do think it's kind of fascinating, so I feel like it's worth adding here. You might not even know this, but at one point in US history there were $1,000 bills. The US Treasury printed $1,000 notes. These bills were mainly used for huge bank transfers and business deals, not something people would really carry around in their wallet. They were officially discontinued in 1969, along with other high-value bills like $500 and even $5,000 notes. But a lot of these old bills have just disappeared. The US Treasury estimates that millions of dollars worth of these $1,000 bills are still out there somewhere, but where? I mean, are they all hidden away in private collections? Maybe, but there are some conspiracy theories here too. Some believe that certain bills were deliberately destroyed or hidden by the government to keep the true extent of the nation's wealth under wraps. Others think that the bills might still be circulating under the radar in the hands of shadowy people in underground deals. Next is a very strange phenomenon called the Taos hum, a low-frequency sound that can only be heard by a small percentage of people. But for those who do hear it, it's maddening. This hum is mostly heard around Taos, New Mexico, but there have been reports from all over the world of similar sounds in other locations like parts of England, Canada, and Japan. The hum is described as this low rumbling sound, like a distant diesel engine running constantly. But when investigators try to find the source, well, they can't. It's not coming from machinery or anything else that can be easily identified. People who hear it often report feeling headaches and insomnia though. Scientists have thrown out theories like tinnitus, which is an ear condition that can cause ringing in the ears, but this isn't really a ringing sound. Some wonder if the hum could be related to electromagnetic fields in the area or seismic activity in the Earth's crust, but some people believe the Taos hum may be stranger, caused by interdimensional energy shifting through our world because of some tear in the fabric of reality, a hint of a parallel universe bleeding through. In 1966, two Brazilian men, Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana, were found dead on a hilltop wearing lead masks, the kind used to shield from radiation. A cop found their bodies after they'd gone missing. The men were lying side by side, there were no signs of a struggle, and there was a small bottle of water next to them. But the masks, nobody could figure out what those were about. They were also carrying a note that looked like instructions for some sort of ritual, mentioning radiation and how to use the masks. The whole thing made it seem like they were about to do some sort of experiment, but no one could figure out what. Were they part of some secret cult? Were they trying to contact aliens? Or were they mixed up in some government experiment? Nobody knows, and no one ever found out how they died. This has become a rather infamous story on Reddit. Always reminds me of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Inner Light. So this guy takes a hit to the head and blacks out. But instead of being out for a few seconds, the guy ends up living what feels like 10 full years in a completely different life. Entirely in his head, of course. In this other version of reality, he meets a woman, falls in love, settles down, starts a family. They go grocery shopping, they argue about bills, they play with their kids in the yard. He remembers what the weather was like, he remembers birthdays. I mean, we're talking real grounded stuff here. This doesn't sound like the type of wacky nonsense that goes on in dreams. Felt like real life. 10 years of it, mind you. But one day in that world, he starts noticing something strange. There's this lamp in the living room, totally normal looking, but it doesn't fit. It starts bugging him.
It's like a little glitch. And the more he stares at it, the more everything else starts to feel wrong. And that's when it all starts unraveling. Suddenly he wakes up. He's lying on the ground, surrounded by people. He's back where he was right before he blacked out. Only minutes have passed. But the man is absolutely devastated. The life he just came back to doesn't feel right anymore. He remembers his wife and kids from the other world. He misses them. They weren't real though, but the emotions were. For a long time after, he struggled. He said it felt like he was mourning people who never existed. Now, was this a case of the brain doing weird things under stress? Or did he tap into something else, a different version of his life that's playing out somewhere, a parallel universe? Ken Korczak, a writer and journalist, had one of the most bizarre experiences, writing an article claiming that he'd slipped into a parallel universe. It wasn't like a whole new world, just a slightly different version of his own home and garden. He said the differences were subtle at first. His pets, specifically his cats and chickens, were behaving completely differently than he was used to. It's like they were the same animals, but something was just off about them, like seeing them through a different lens. In his words, it felt like everything in his yard was a few degrees askew. But the weirdest part came when he met this strange female entity. She wasn't human, at least not in the way you'd think. Korczak described her as resembling an elf or a fairy, and she seemed completely at home in this alternate reality. He also described feeling like she was there for a reason, like she was some kind of guide in this parallel world. He spent a lot of time reflecting on it, especially the strange, almost magical feeling of meeting this being. He genuinely believes that he had a real encounter with a parallel version of his home. As someone who's always been interested in the concept of alternate realities too, he dove deep trying to make sense of it. Was this just a hallucination, or did he actually slip into another dimension for a brief moment? In December of 2024, Google made a pretty big announcement about their new quantum chip, Willow. This chip solved a problem in 5 minutes that would have taken even the fastest supercomputers 47 years. What was amazing here though wasn't just how fast the chip was, it's also what the head of Google's quantum AI team, Hartmut Nevins, said about it. He mentioned that this speed might be a sign that their quantum computers are pulling from multiple realities at once. Not just a throwaway comment, he was serious about this. And this ties in with something called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which states that every decision or event causes the universe to split into different versions, creating a parallel reality for each possibility. So when a quantum computer like Willow does a calculation, it's possible that it's tapping into these other universes, running all the possibilities at once, without us even realizing it. And it's not just Google talking along these lines. Other tech companies like IBM and D-Wave have been exploring quantum computing for years, and some think this technology could eventually lead us to understand or even interact with alternate realities. It's not quite science fiction anymore. Quantum computing might be the closest thing we've got to real-world proof that the multiverse could exist. So it's a sweltering day in July of 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. A man arrives on an international flight and walks up to customs. Everything seems routine. He looks European, speaks multiple languages, and has a legit-looking passport, from a distance that is. Looking at it up close, turns out this passport says he's from a country called Torrid. Never heard of it? Neither had the Japanese officials. They ask him to point it out on a map, and without hesitation he points to the area around where Andorra is, between France and Spain, but he's confused. He insists Torrid has been a country for over 1,000 years. The customs officers are confused, to say the least. Is this a joke? Is the guy just out of his mind? The guy seems just as confused as they are. His passport has stamps from other countries, including past visits to Japan, and he has multiple currencies in his wallet. He even mentions a business trip and says he's got meetings set up with a company in Tokyo, but when the officials call the company, they say they've never heard of him. Same story with the hotel that he claimed to have booked. At this point, they're really not sure what to do with him, so they put him up in a hotel room under guard for the night while they try to figure things out. But by the next morning, he's gone. The room was locked from the outside. There was no way out, at least none that the guards wouldn't have been able to see. To this day, no one knows who he was or where he came from, really. Some think he slipped into our world from another reality and then slipped right back out. Others think this whole story is just a good old-fashioned urban legend, but if we seriously consider the possibility that the multiverse really is a thing, well then this story starts to sound a little less
outlandish. The Marcahuasi stone forest in Peru is one of those places that seems to have a ton of weird stuff happening. People have been talking about strange occurrences there for years, mostly because the place is filled with these huge stone structures that look like they belong to some ancient civilization. But there are also some strange stories surrounding this place. Well, one goes that a group of hikers got a lot more than they bargained for when they camped here. While hanging out, they started to hear some music coming from what seemed like a cabin in the middle of nowhere. It sounded like a celebration. The group looked around and sure enough, they spotted a stone cabin lit up from the inside, and they could see people dancing through the windows. The people were dressed like they were from the 1600s, all in old-fashioned clothes. Naturally, one of the hikers decided to check things out. She got closer to the cabin, and the closer she got, the stranger things became. Her friend noticed that she was acting off, like her body was stiff and she wasn't walking right. Got even weirder when she suddenly couldn't move her arm, like she was partially paralyzed. They managed to pull her away from the cabin, and she snapped out of it right away. People who know the area say the Marcahuasi might be some kind of doorway between dimensions or timelines. The idea is that certain spots on Earth might have thin barriers to other worlds, and that cabin could have been a glimpse into some different time. This story comes from a Reddit user named Albert Norman 2069, who shared an experience that left him questioning everything about the world. It had all started on June 28, 2014, a day that seemed normal at first. He'd woken up, brushed his teeth, ate breakfast, and headed out to work. But as he turned on the car radio, something wasn't right. Instead of the usual music, the station was airing a talk show. The host was excitedly talking about something called Victory in the Great War, and praising the troops for their role in this victory. At first, the Redditor thought maybe it was some kind of special segment, but the more the host went on, the stranger things got. There was talk of a victory in Italy, and something about the Second Great Depression finally coming to an end. He was confused, but he ended up brushing things off. It was probably just fictional. But then things started getting even stranger when he was at work. During lunch, he overheard his coworkers talking about the same victory in Italy, and they kept mentioning the numbers 33 to 13. When he asked what they were talking about, they acted like he was the odd one for not knowing. And when he asked about a coworker named Sam, who didn't seem to be there, no one seemed to remember it. At least something was very off. On his way home, he decided to take a different route to avoid traffic, and that's when he noticed that the city looked worse than he remembered. Buildings were crumbling, some were abandoned, and there were banners everywhere again celebrating this mysterious victory. When he finally got home, he flicked on the news. The anchors were talking about the victory in Italy and how the US was dealing with a war abroad. Europe was also in chaos, and the US was in an even worse depression than the 1930s. Of course, things went back to normal by the next day. So was it just a really vivid dream? Well, possibly. But perhaps Albert Norman 2069 really did spend a day in a much darker version of our own reality. Next up are some pretty strange cave paintings, the Wanjinas, some of the most mysterious and downright eerie cave art on Earth. These ancient paintings are found in the Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, painted by Aboriginal tribes whose culture has been going strong for over 60,000 years. The Wanjinas, according to legend, were sky beings, spirits from the clouds who came down during dream time, said to be this time when the Earth was still being formed. These beings supposedly created the land, animals, people, everything. They taught the Aboriginals how to live, and then they vanished. Some say they returned to the stars, others say they went underground. But, I mean, just look at these cave paintings, the big black eyes, the pale skin, they look like aliens. But this art is estimated to be tens of thousands of years old, long before anyone was talking about aliens, at least not in the modern sense. Kinda makes you wonder, are the Wanjinas more than just myth? Did these ancient tribes actually encounter something from beyond the stars, or maybe even from a parallel reality? This final story comes from Reddit user GoodResolve33 and goes as follows. When I was younger, my cousins and I would play in my aunt's basement during major holiday parties. Parents would be upstairs and we would all just hang out and mess around in the basement, entertaining ourselves with whatever junk was down there. Well, there was a metal door down there with a bolt lock that we never touched. But one day, we unlocked the door and we saw a major boxing event going on. I'm talking Jumbotron, bright lights, arena, and a major crowd. Everything seemed to freeze when we opened the door though. People in the crowd turned around to look at us. Fighters stopped fighting, the referee signaled us out, and we saw shadows in the crowd running toward us. It all sounds crazy, but I remember how scared we were. We shut the door, ran upstairs, and sat in the living room with our parents. I remember them being like, "What's going on with these guys?" As we sat in the living room silent, crapping ourselves because we thought we were going to get in trouble. Fast forward to much later. I tried to tell my parents, and they swear that I imagined it. I thought I did too for the longest time, until randomly, one of my cousins from that day hit me up after so long of not communicating, only to bring up that same event, detail for detail as I described and remembered it. I go back to that house to check out the door. Across the door is the neighbor's basement door, since it was a duplex, and stairs leading up the metal basement doors that come out to the backyard. Not sure what the F that was, and I promise you I'm not that crazy. I get goosebumps thinking about the situation sometimes because it makes absolutely zero sense.
What would you do if you saw yourself walking out the door while you were still sitting at your desk? A Reddit user named Trigger Happy Greg, which we'll talk about that later, worked night shifts at a small call center. One evening around 2 a.m., his coworker looked up and said, "Didn't you just leave?" Confused, Greg replied, "What are you talking about? I've been sitting here." The coworker swore she saw Greg walk past her office and out the front door. Same hoodie, same walk, same everything. They even checked the security camera, and sure enough, there was Greg walking out. But Greg had never left, and the security footage glitched right as he hit the parking lot. Erased, like someone never meant for him to be seen. Imagine someone who looks exactly like you, calling your dog by name and walking down your street like they live your life. A woman from Oregon shared a chilling story on a paranormal Facebook group. Her neighbor knocked on her door one evening, confused, and asked, "Why didn't you say hi earlier? I saw you walking Max." Only this woman had been inside all day. Max, her golden retriever, hadn't left the house. The neighbor was adamant, said she even waved and the woman waved back. Creeped out, she checked her doorbell cam and saw someone with her exact face walking Max past the house. But, conveniently, the footage froze just as the double turned to look at the camera. What if you called your own phone and someone answered? A man named Alex recounted this story about parallel universes. While looking for his missing phone, he used his partner's device to call it, and someone picked up. The voice on the other end said hello, but it was his voice. The same tone, same speech pattern. The voice said, "Don't come looking for me," and hung up. Later, Alex found his phone under the couch, completely dead. There was no missed calls, no records of an incoming call. It was as if whoever answered was using a different version of his phone. What if someone knocked at your door and you answered while you were still upstairs? This story comes from a Reddit user named Mirror Moments, who shared an experience from when she was a teenager. One afternoon, she was upstairs in her bedroom when her friend came over and rang the doorbell. Her mom wasn't home, so no one should have answered, but her friend said that someone did, and it was her. The other her opened the door, smiled, and said, "I'm busy, come back later," before shutting it quietly. The friend was so weirded out by the interaction that she texted her asking what was going on. That's when Mirror Moments ran downstairs in confusion, only to find the door still locked. Her friend was standing outside, pale and wide-eyed. She swore that it was her. The same hoodie, the same voice, the same smirk. It was her friend. She knows what her friend looks like. When they checked the security cam footage later, it glitched right at the time the door supposedly opened. No motion, no video, just static, almost like something or someone didn't want to be seen. Someone showed up at your house claiming to be you, and your family believed them. Redditor Pale Orange Sky posted that her younger sister swore she'd picked her up from school one day, drove her home, and even helped with her homework. The problem? Well, she was working a double shift that day. Her car was parked at her job, and she had proof. Time cards, and surveillance. But her sister described the car perfectly, described her outfit, described conversations they'd supposedly had. Quote, "You told me to stay away from the old tree in the backyard," her sister said. Only she'd never said that before. Or at least, not in this universe. What's up with that old tree? I want to know why the parallel universe version was so concerned about the tree. Something mysterious. You get home and the door's unlocked. Someone's in the shower. It's you! A man named James from Missouri told his story to a paranormal podcast. He came home after a weekend trip and heard the water running. He assumed his roommate was home early, but when he opened the bathroom door, he froze. Why would he open the door when he thinks his roommate is in the shower? It's a creepy roommate. Anyways. The person in the shower had his tattoo, his build, his voice. They both screamed. The other James bolted through the back door and then vanished. When he told his roommate later, the roommate casually said, "Dude, I thought you were already here. I talked to you like an hour ago." What if one day everyone acted like you weren't you? In 2016, a woman named Marissa shared an incident in a thread about identity glitches. She walked into work and nobody recognized her. Her boss claimed they'd already spoken that morning. Her coffee was already at her desk. Someone had clocked in with her badge 20 minutes earlier. She checked the security footage and saw a woman who looked exactly like her, wearing the same clothes, walking into the office and doing everything that she normally did. The footage froze as the real Marissa walked in. Her double was never seen leaving. When your reflection moves before you do, run. A man in the UK posted on a lucid dreaming subreddit that he was brushing his teeth one morning when he noticed something was off. His reflection wasn't synced. It blinked a little too early, tilted its head before he did, and then it smiled. And he hadn't smiled. He turned around and ran out of the bathroom, nearly slipping. When he went back later, everything looked normal, except for one thing. The toothpaste cap was off, but he remembered screwing it back on. I guess the reflection didn't. Someone showed up at the DMV pretending to be you. Honestly, that's not so bad. They can wait in line for me. That's totally fine. In 2019, a man named Eric from Pennsylvania went to renew his passport and was told, "We already issued it yesterday." Confused, he checked, and sure enough, someone with his name, birth date, and even address had already picked it up. He asked for the security footage and saw someone who looked exactly like him down to a scar on his cheek, but Eric had been at work, logged into his company computer at the time. He reported it, but authorities never found the imposter or the passport. That's like crazy to think that your parallel universe doppelganger could come here and steal your identity. Would it even be a crime? I mean, technically, they are you. Sorry, I'm just like really having a moment. Like, guys, let's think about that for a second. Would they be jailed if they caught them? Let's say, yeah, they caught them. Would they be jailed for trying to steal your identity, even though it technically is their identity too? I don't know. Let me know down below. What if you met your double and they acted like you were the intruder? One of the most disturbing stories comes from a woman in Australia who shared her experience on a podcast called Somewhere Else. While staying at an Airbnb, she swore she saw someone walking into the living room from the hallway. A woman with her exact face and clothes. They locked eyes. The other version of her whispered, "You're not supposed to be here," and then apparently just disappeared into thin air. She packed up and left that night. When she checked the Airbnb listing later, it had been removed. No record of the host, no record of her stay. Even her confirmation email was gone. Doppelganger stories aren't just eerie. They challenge everything we think we know about identity, time, and maybe even reality itself. Whether they're signs of a multiverse, glitches in our simulation, or something stranger entirely, one thing's for sure, these stories are more than just spooky coincidences. They're warnings.
Okay, well, first and foremost, let's talk about what multiverse theory is. Well, as of right now, it is a theory created by Hugh Everett III that follows the idea that instead of one single reality where everything exists in just one of many possible states, there are endless realities in which all of the possibilities dictated by quantum mechanics or the laws of nature exist at once. It's a pretty interesting thought. In even simpler terms, it's like there's a reality for every possible scenario. If your friend asked you to go out last weekend and you said no, in another reality you said yes. And if you don't have friends, in another reality, you do. What's interesting about this theory, other than the fact that it illustrates the idea of infinite existence, is that it actually lines up pretty well with man's pattern of knowledge in regards to the universe. I mean, at one point we thought that the universe revolved around the Earth. We now know that's not true. Not only that, but the universe doesn't even revolve around our solar system. Multiverse theory is really just the logical next step in our understanding of the vastness of overall existence and the insignificance of the individual experience.
In 2011, Columbia University physicist Brian Greene made an interesting point about the possibility of the existence of multiverses, comparing the universe to a deck of cards. Now, this goes off the assumption that space just stretches on and on forever. We can't say for certain if that's the case, but it's a very real possibility. Now, if space does go on forever though, let's think of the universe as a deck of cards. In a deck, there are 52 cards, in our universe anyway, and if you shuffle them, you'll get different orders of those cards. But if you keep shuffling forever, you'll eventually repeat the same order. There are only so many ways to arrange the 52 cards. If we apply this idea to the universe, imagine that all the matter in the universe, stars, planets, everything else, can only be arranged in so many ways. If space is infinite and goes on forever, then eventually the arrangement of matter will also repeat. There would be regions of space that are exactly or nearly exactly like our own universe, with similar planets, people, and events. And this leads to the idea of the multiverse, an infinite number of parallel universes. Each of these universes range from vastly different to everything almost being exactly like our own or even identical. In some of these universes, maybe the only difference is that you wore a different shirt today than you have on now, while in others the differences could be vast.
Okay, so this next one's a bit philosophical, but bear with me because, as Picasso once said, if you can imagine something, it must exist. And people have been imagining the multiverse long before the theory was solidified by Everett. Many ancient texts are filled with various descriptions that directly align with multiverse theory. In fact, multiverse theory was actually a common teaching in ancient Greek schools of philosophy, where students learned about the reality of an infinite number of worlds existing scattered throughout an infinite void. The Bishop of Paris was also documented in 1277 arguing with Aristotle, claiming that there was no way that there was only one possible world, and to think that there was would be an insult to God's ability to create parallel ones. And in the 1600s, one of the leaders of the scientific revolution, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, argued the existence of the multiverse, claiming that there were many possible worlds, each adhering to their own distinct laws of physics. Basically, no matter what you believe in, science, religion, or both, you can always find something that supports the theory, and I think that says something.
What are the chances that we're living in a universe where life can flourish? Well, very low, actually. It's pretty amazing that things are the way they are. The fine-tuning problem is a fascinating puzzle about why the universe seems perfectly set up for life. If we were to tweak a few of the universe's basic settings, we wouldn't be here. If protons were just a bit heavier, they'd break apart into simpler particles, making atoms and matter as we know it impossible. If gravity were slightly stronger, stars like our sun would burn through their fuel too quickly for life to have the time to evolve. So, the question is, why is everything so perfectly tuned for life? Some point to a creator having set up the universe just right, but there's also the multiverse theory, that maybe our universe is just one of countless others, and in most of these universes the conditions aren't right for life. But in a few, like ours, everything happens to be just right. We won the lottery. So, either the universe was designed with life in mind, or we just happen to live in one of the few universes where the conditions are perfect.
Okay, by now you should have a pretty good grasp on what multiverse theory is. If you don't, you might want to start the video over and listen carefully this time, because this next point is about to get as convoluted as a Rick and Morty subplot. Because multiverse theory could actually support simulation theory. and vice versa. If you don't know what simulation theory is, it's a theoretical hypothesis that states that what we perceive as reality is actually some kind of advanced hyper-realistic computer simulation. In simple terms, you know how we're kind of afraid of robots becoming sentient and gaining free will? Well, what if we were just computer programs that became sentient and now have what we perceive as free will, but we're really just code running around inside some alien's laptop? If you're feeling a bit of existentialism right now, don't worry, because you're not alone. I'm right there with you. But if simulation theory does exist and our existence really is just one big computer program, that program could be run and rerun an infinite amount of times to simulate infinite versions of our universe, or somehow it's running all at once. On the flip side, if multiverse theory is real, doesn't that mean that in at least one parallel universe, simulation theory is correct? Don't think about it too hard because you might break your brain, but think about it.
The concept of bubble universes is also a pretty fascinating one. It all has to do with the theory of cosmic inflation, that our universe is just one of many bubbles in a vast, multi-dimensional space, each with its own unique properties and physical laws, almost like a giant cosmic foam, where each bubble represents a separate universe. Now, just as bubbles and a foam can have different sizes and shapes and properties, each bubble universe can have its own distinct characteristics, like different types of matter and energy, different gravitational forces, even alternate versions of the physical laws that dictate how everything works. The idea is that during the rapid expansion of the universe, in the early stages of the Big Bang, different regions of space-time became isolated from each other, creating these bubble universes. Each bubble universe then evolved independently. But is there any potential proof of this theory? Well, that's what Hannah's getting into next.
Next up, the multiverse theory is correct because we have observational evidence. Well, yeah, kind of. You see, scientists at the European Space Agency's Planck Orbital Observatory have been and are currently gathering data on something called CMB. Cosmic background radiation, which is radiation that still lingers from, as James mentioned, the early, extremely hot stages of our universe's existence. Here's the thing. In 2010, a team of scientists from Great Britain, Canada, and the United States discovered 4 strange circular patterns in the CMB, which they believed were caused by our universe bumping into another universe. And in 2015, another researcher at the European Space Agency made a similar discovery. Randy Ramcherry took a model of the CMB out of the observatory's picture of the sky. He then went on to remove everything else that we are already aware of from the image. He took out the stars, the gas, interstellar dust, etc. Now, while doing all of this should have left the image pretty much blank except for some background noise, it didn't. In fact, Cherry was able to detect areas in the night sky that were 4,500 times brighter than they should be. His scientific conclusion that the light particles were actually imprints from a collision between our universe and another. Science, baby.
Next, we gotta talk about the sheer size of the universe. It makes the possibility of parallel ones even more plausible. Our universe is incredibly vast, and it might even be infinite in size. So the scale means there's a lot we can't see or detect. The universe is about 13.8 billion years old, so we can only observe light that has traveled to us within that time frame. Anything beyond 13.8 billion light years away is just too far for us to detect, no matter how powerful our telescopes are. Now, think about the possibility that there are regions of space far beyond what we can see. These regions could be part of a larger multiverse, containing parallel realities that are completely separate from our own. If the universe is infinitely large, then it's not just likely, but it's pretty much certain.
For this next point, I thought we'd have a bit of fun and talk about how dreams could be proof of the existence of multiple parallel universes. Or at the very least, how if there are in fact multiple parallel universes, our dreams could be a glimpse into some of the others. While it used to be widely accepted that our dreams were simply a succession of ideas, emotions, and sensations involuntarily brought forward during various stages of sleep by our subconscious, it is now now believed by some that dreams are actually so much more. Perhaps we are somehow connected to our parallel selves living in parallel universes, and things like dreams and deja vu are our way of communicating with one another. I know it sounds crazy, and I know it sounds a bit like I've lost my marbles, fallen off my rocker, and gone off the deep end all at once, but hey, if multiverse theory is real, in one of those universes, this theory could be too.
The mathematical universe theory, also known as the mathematical multiverse or mathematical universe hypothesis. So this proposes that because the universe is made up of mathematical structures, maybe different mathematical structures represent separate universes. Mathematics is not a human invention. Mathematics was a discovery that we've used to help make sense of the universe. Our universe is like a giant cosmic equation where everything can be described and understood through mathematics. Not understood by me, but by smarter people. There are infinite numbers of mathematical possibilities, so all of these mathematical possibilities are almost like a library with an infinite number of books, each representing a different mathematical structure. Our universe might just be one of these books on the shelf with its own specific mathematical rules that govern how all the particles, the galaxies, and everything else in between behaves. There could be an infinite number of parallel universes, each with its own unique set of physical laws. In one universe, gravity might work differently, while in another, the speed of light might be different. Every possibility could exist in a separate universe, making our reality just one of many. I heard him call out to me, but he wasn't home. From Reddit user Timely Discussion 90 comes a pretty eerie experience she had one night. So last night my husband was out with his mates. I was at home alone with the dogs. He left his house keys at home and I told him to text me when he's on his way so I can unlock the door. At about 11:30 p.m. I was reading and heard my husband at the door say, "Hey babe, the dogs didn't move," and I said, "Yeah, 1 second." I got no response. He'd normally respond with "no worries" or something along those lines. I froze when I realized he didn't respond. I messaged him and he was still out at his mate's place. The feeling I felt once I said 1 second was a feeling of gut-wrenching dread. It was like my insides ran cold and I have no idea why. It took me a good hour before I calmed down. My husband arrived home around 2 hours later. What the hell was this? It was 100% his voice. Reddit user Plastic Context 8570 shares their terrifying experience hearing someone using their shower upstairs, only no one was home. I recently moved into a 2-story apartment with no upstairs or downstairs neighbors. I've heard weird things a lot since I've been here. Footsteps, drawers opening and closing, my door slamming. But something I can't even explain just happened. My roommate is at work and I'm the only one home. I was sitting downstairs, zoned out and drawing, when I realized I was hearing footsteps and noise upstairs, followed by the noise of the shower turning on. After a while of sitting there listening, I finally got the courage to go upstairs and check the bathroom. The shower curtain was completely closed, and sure enough, the water was running. I could see the water drops hitting the curtain and slightly moving it. I heard it hitting the bottom of the tub. I know it wasn't on before, and honestly, this really freaked me out. So naturally, I got the F out of there and hid downstairs shaking until I found the strength to go back and open the curtain. After about 10 minutes, I heard the shower turn off. The curtains move, loud footsteps, then silence. I somehow got myself to go back up and about 20 minutes later, look in the bathroom. The curtains were now open halfway so you could see into the shower and the water was off. I checked the whole upstairs and found nothing. No one came down and no one went up. So yeah, just a note to this Redditor. Forget the glitch in the Matrix thing. You have a squatter in your apartment. I'd set up some hidden cameras. This was posted yesterday, so get on that. Ever had a lost item reappear out of nowhere? This happened to Redditor Dazzling Grass 7531, who said they'd grabbed their hand sanitizer from their backpack while sitting on the couch, used it, and went to bed. The next day they noticed it was missing. They searched everywhere, tearing apart their backpack, checking the couch cushions, but there was no sign of it. They finally remembered the Wi-Fi camera they had set up to watch their pets, which was aimed at the couch. Checking the footage, they found the moment where they put the sanitizer back in the backpack. So they went to check the backpack one more time, and there it was, clearly visible in the main compartment. Dazzling Grass finished off by saying, "I'm absolutely certain it was not in there. It's in the main compartment, and there was nothing else in the compartment except the hand sanitizer. It would have been impossible to miss. I feel like I tricked the universe into giving it back." One commenter said that the story reminded them of the double slit experiment in quantum physics, and that is actually a really interesting point. For those of you who don't know, this is an experiment that shows how light and tiny particles, like electrons, can behave in very strange ways, mainly that they can act differently depending whether you're looking at them or not. So imagine we have a wall with two narrow slits and then another wall behind it. When light or particles shine through these slits, you'd expect to see two lines on the wall in the back, corresponding to where these slits are. But instead, you see a pattern of many lines, like stripes. This happens because the light waves spread out and interfere with each other. But here's the thing. If you try to watch which slit the particles go through, they behave like regular particles and you only see the two lines. But when you don't observe them, they act totally differently, like waves, creating that interference pattern. It's very strange, but observation seems to affect how particles behave. Basically, what I'm getting at, for the sake of entertainment here, is if this Redditor never looked at the footage of them putting the hand sanitizer back in their bag, would it have been there if they looked a second time? Or had they just somehow missed it the first time? Ever experienced a Mandela effect that only you and a small group of people close to you know about? Like, say, your car changing color, for example? Because that's what happened to this next Reddit user, Professional Ear 5923. They had a blue 2001 Volkswagen Jetta TDI, a car they spent plenty of time in with friends. Even though they didn't drive it much anymore, it did work as a hangout spot, especially since they lived in a small trailer with their family. They'd just been in the car the night before when they glanced out the window only to see that the car had changed color to green. The Redditor called their friends over to check it out, and to their surprise, everyone thought the car had been blue as well. This haunted the Reddit user and their friends, especially after they dug through old photos and realized the car had apparently always been green. So what happened here? Did a family member accidentally wreck their car and then replace it with a green one overnight, or something like that? Or could this really be a genuine glitch in reality? From Reddit user Black Widow 44 comes the Vanishing Mountains. I was living in southern Washington and would often kayak in this lake where you had a very clear view of two large mountains. I had a favorite spot I liked to kayak out to where I'd sit and enjoy the view. One day I went to the lake to kayak. As I was approaching my spot, I noticed that you very clearly could not see the two very large mountains as usual. I thought maybe I was too far away and the mountains were under the horizon or something, but as I reached my spot, the mountains were nowhere in sight. I had many very clear landmarks that told me I knew I was looking in the right direction. The mountains are very close to this lake, and before you guys say it, visibility was perfect. There were no clouds. The mountains were simply not there. It was the eeriest thing. It's as if the mountains grew legs and walked away. I had two other friends with me who frequented this lake who confirmed the entire story and can also not explain it. To this day, I am sure I entered a parallel universe or that lake was some kind of Earth vortex. From Reddit user the name Forever comes a very eerie possible glitch in the Matrix. So the other night I was driving to my mom's house. I looked down at my GPS and it said ETA 2 minutes. I look up and suddenly I'm back on the highway and my GPS says 30 minutes. No time had passed. Weird maybe, but I sometimes space out and miss an exit, though I had already gotten off the highway and was close to turning onto my road. I didn't think much of it though. Then exactly 2.5 minutes later, as I was supposed to be arriving, my mother calls and goes, "Hey, can you bring down X, Y, and Z?" I was like, "Oh, I think I missed my exit. It's gonna be a while." She laughs and says, "Funny, just bring it down." I insist to her I am not there, and she says, "But I saw your headlights. Heard your key in the door. You said hi, Mom, and the dogs were at the door going crazy." I told her to check the driveway. She does, getting scary quiet, and says, "I gotta sit down." Turns out She was on the phone with my sister when it happened, and to this day, my sister swears she also heard me say hi mom and heard the door slam shut. The story of a transforming woman comes to us from Redditor Alster5000. On my walk today, there's a bit that's a wide straight path with no ways to get off the path for about 300 meters. On one side there's thick bushes, on the other tall fences on the edge of AstroTurf football pitches. I'm walking one way and the other person on the path is a woman coming from the opposite direction. She's wearing light pink baggy trousers and a black top, blonde hair, and glasses. I look down to my phone because I got a message, realize it's not something I need to respond to, and look back up. The gap between us has closed a few meters, but now the woman is wearing baggy blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and she's got green hair, a nose piercing, and no glasses. I look at her really confused, and she just sort of stares at me as she walks past. There's nowhere the first woman could have turned off the path, and the speed we were both walking, the second woman was in the right spot from the time I looked down and up from my phone. This next bizarre story comes from Reddit user CGCX3, who saw something completely unexpected on their drive home from school one day. So there's a city about 45 minutes from mine. Until this past month, we went to the city about 5 or 6 times a year for the last 15 years. We always go there and back on the same road. I started going to college in this city this semester, so I've been there about 20 times in the last month. Always on the same road, 2 times a day, 4 times a week. One day when I was driving back from school, I saw a neighborhood off to my right. It's not tucked back in a tree line or anything, and it's not just 1 or 2 houses, it's a line of maybe 15 to 20 houses, cookie cutter style, and a straight line perpendicular to the main road. The houses are all facing me as I drive home. The first one is maybe 20 to 30 feet from the road. There's cars at all the houses and they don't look super new, but they're not old either. I can tell it's on an old pasture land, so there's no trees and there's no sign advertising a new neighborhood. I have never seen this neighborhood before. When I drove by it, I was like, what the crap? Where did that come from? I drove by this morning and I saw the neighborhood and got a sense of unease, like I'm seeing something that shouldn't be there. I've been racking my brain trying to remember if this neighborhood was here before this week, but I can say with certainty I have never seen it before. Now this next one really reads like the intro to a Stephen King novel. Reddit user Abducted by Neon shared their story about a gas station and some mysterious fog. I was on a small road trip. My 2 friends and I were going across state lines to drop one of them off at home. It's later at night, very dark out, and no moon. We're driving down the highway and there's no cars around. We're running out of gas, so we pull over to a station, fill up. This is when it gets weird. We start driving and I glance at the clock. It's nearly 2 a.m. We're driving down the road for maybe half an hour when we hit some fog. The radio starts going nuts and dies. The place we were going to is only 2 hours away from the gas station, so we figured it wasn't a big deal. We'd just chat. 2 hours pass. No cars, no lights, no gas stations. It was like we were nowhere that existed. The fog was still around too, and we were starting to get worried that maybe we got lost. We futzed with the radio some more to try to get it to turn on, but it wouldn't. After another hour of driving, we spot lights in the distance. It was a gas station. Suddenly the fog lifted, and as we pulled in, we realized this was the same gas station. The radio turned on as we pulled up, 3 a.m., but we'd definitely gone longer than that. Had we somehow gone in a circle? Maybe this wasn't the same gas station? We got back in the car and left, but we never hit the fog again and made it to my friend's place in 2 hours. To this day, I think about that and I can't explain it. It was the most bizarre thing that's ever happened to me. And finally, from Always Manic comes the vanishing woman. I go to college in a small town. One night, me and a friend are coming back home from hanging out at a friend's house when we see what seems to be an old lady from a distance. I distinctly remember looking at her feet to see if she was walking to or away from us. We had a whole discussion about why the hell there's an old lady walking at 3 a.m. because 1, she's old, and 2, it's a college town anyway. Mid-discussion, she literally turns into smoke, fog, or vapor, and just blows away in the wind. We both see it and my friend yells out, "What the F?" And I just stand there, staring at the empty air where the old lady was. We sat up all night replaying step by step what we saw, but realized there was nothing we could possibly do or recount that would change what happened.